Hi everyone, welcome to another great O'Reilly webcast. I am Nurul Ishak with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. Our speaker today is Devon Hillard and Christian Paulus, and they will be talking to you about protecting and optimizing your e-commerce site in 2017. This webcast is sponsored by Cloudflare. Cloudflare's mission is to help build a better internet. Cloudflare makes any website, mobile app, and API lightning fast, protects them from cyber attacks, and ensures they are always online. Today, the company runs one of the world's largest networks, powering more than 10 trillion requests per month, nearly 10% of all internet requests for more than 2.5 billion people worldwide. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's webcast. Devon is the creator of 10minutemail.com and a founding partner at SparkRed, managed hosting provider for some of the highest volume e-commerce businesses in the US, Europe, and South Africa. He has spent nearly 2 decades optimizing site performance and securing systems for dozens of online retailers, including Burberry, Ulta, Scott's, Tom's Shoes, Strola Table, and Mr. Price, South Africa. Devon is passionate about all things web performance and has given multiple presentations on best practices for e-commerce site performance and security optimization at such events as FutureStack and HostingCon. Now, Christian leads product marketing at Cloudflare. In his role, Christian is responsible for taking Cloudflare's leading internet performance and security services to market. Prior to Cloudflare, he led product marketing at VMware for multiple major cloud management product lines, including the vCloud Suite and VMware flagship product vRealize Automation. Now, before I turn over the program to Devon and Christian, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to help you get the most out of today's webcast. You want to open the group chat widget if you haven't already done so. It is located at the bottom of the screen page. If you scroll down, this is where we'll interact with each other during the event and where you'll submit your questions for the speakers. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you to chat freely during the event. Now, if you have questions, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we can make sure it is seen as Q&A. We are recording today's webcast and will have the archive ready in 24 to 48 hours. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Devon to start the presentation. Hi, Devon.
Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Devon Hillard, and as mentioned, I'm one of the founders of SparkRed, and we provide managed hosting for the e-commerce websites for dozens of international retailers, most of whom you'll find on Fortune 1000, Internet Retailer 500, and Global Retailer 500 lists. As such, we have a lot of hands-on experience with real-world security and performance issues that affect major websites and e-commerce in particular. So I want to share with you guys today some of the security trends we've seen in the wild with our live clients. Page forward here. There we go. So first I want to talk about data theft. As the e-commerce channel continues to grow, with more and more people becoming comfortable shopping on their laptops, tablets, and phones, those same people are becoming a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more aware of and also concerned about security risks associated with computer security threats for websites and corporate data. And specifically, they're becoming more aware of data theft, identity theft, and credit card fraud. There were over 1,000 large-scale data breaches at major retailers last year, and these data breaches are being reported on in the mainstream news, and companies are becoming more responsible about alerting their customers to data loss incidents. I'm sure you guys have gotten some of those emails, which are always sort of a panic-inducing moment where they say, oh, we're sorry to tell you we've had a data breach. Please reset your password. Please check your credit report, etc. So while people are being more responsive about reporting on these issues, that positive trend is also leading to more consumer awareness of the risks of online shopping. We're also seeing a significant increase in data breaches year over year. You can see a 40% increase from 2015 to 2016. That's a pretty significant jump. And the situation, I think, is only going to get worse as more data and the value of that data increases. So security becomes, I don't know, even a bigger deal than it is today. Cost of data breaches is extremely high to the impacted company, both financially as well as with reputation. Every time a major company is in the news, announcing hundreds of millions of people's information stolen, the public is more aware of the risks, and people associate those risks not only with the company that suffered the breach, but also with online shopping in general, even if that may not have been where the threat originated. So many data breaches can be attributed to phishing or skimming attacks. Hacking websites is still a key attack vector for gaining data and then for also using that data for profit later. So at SparkRed, we're seeing more frequent and more sophisticated brute force attacks, both related to attempting to get a data breach and then also using data breach or data from a breach, which I'll get into in just a moment here. Thankfully, and I'm knocking on wood, we've never had a client suffer a data theft issue. However, we have many clients who have had several issues with DDoS attacks and brute force hacking attempts. Talking a little bit about DDoS attacks, you can see that large-scale attacks, which here we're characterizing attacks that are driving traffic of 100 gigabytes a second, or gigabits a second or more, you can see that they're increasing dramatically year over year. And then in the first half of 2016, we had more attacks than the entire of 2015. So this is just getting worse. And I'm sure you guys are aware of some of the major newsworthy attacks, but these things are happening every day and impacting hundreds of websites and web applications. In addition to increasing in frequency, the size of those attacks has also been increasing. So we're seeing a ramp up of the sophistication and the reach of those botnets, booter networks, in general, the ability of malicious players to bring to bear a high volume network attack against a target or a set of targets. It's just getting worse as time goes on. Most DDoS attacks kind of fall into two categories. There's those targeting the network, so they're simply trying to push a large number of bytes or packets to overwhelm a network device or web server. And then there's also attacks that are targeting the application. So they're sending specific requests or accessing resources within the application, either to gain access to data or to simply overwhelm the application itself. E-commerce sites are especially susceptible to application-level DDoSs due to having several high-cost transactions. So what I mean by a high-cost transaction is something that you can access through an HTTP request, whether that's a GET or a POST, that has a significant resource burn on the application server side. So for instance, a login attempt or a forgot password or a order status lookup, things that are a lot more difficult and resource intensive to handle than simply a page request, for instance. So static assets are very quick and easy to serve, especially with a CDN in place, but doing a forgot password flow requires database hit. So someone submits an email address in a forgot password flow, that email address usually has some sort of validation, and then typically will drive a database query, which is a select across a table that may have tens of millions of records in it. And if it returns data, then an email has to be generated and sent, a temporary password created, et cetera. And even if there is no return data, then a dynamic error page or message comes back. So there's a CPU burn as well as the network traffic, and then typically a database query as well. Same thing with order status pages. We've seen web applications with e-commerce applications that have simplistic order status pages where people will try to brute force order numbers or other unique identifiers in order to get information about a customer's address or purchase history, et cetera. Basically anything that costs an attacker almost nothing to do, that causes your web application to have to burn CPU on network or database resources, makes it easy for a relatively low-scale application DDoS attack to take down a web application, even if it has significant hardware resources behind it. So we're seeing e-commerce sites being especially susceptible to this type of attack versus more of a media-centric type of website. But we also had a client in particular who was contacted by the Armada Collective last year. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Armada Collective threats of last year or the actual Armada Collective attacks that I believe were 2014 or 2015. But basically what happened was a group who were calling themselves the Armada Collective, although in hindsight we believe it was a different group of people than the original Armada Collective, contacted a number of major websites and basically ransomed them. They threatened if you don't pay us a certain number of Bitcoins by this address, we're going to launch a giant DDoS and take down your website. They promised that they were able to beat typical security measures, CDNs, et cetera. At the end, the threats turned out to be hot air. No major DDoSs were launched, no sites were taken down, but the Armada Collective still made over 6 figures in ransoms paid by companies who didn't want to chance it. So that's a sort of an interesting tale, I think, and this is very recently, right? People are very sophisticated, lots of technical options, and tons of people still opted to pay the ransom rather than risk the attack. Now, in my opinion, it's important to never pay extortionists on this and simply be smart about protecting your website from this type of attack. Let's talk about that a little bit. So in general, you don't want to try to deal with the DDoS attack yourself. So trying to manage that type of attack, especially a network level attack, on standard hosting setup at the origin is a poor approach, in my opinion. It's impossible to be able to have the traffic handling capacity and the performance and throughput capacity to manage a medium to large scale DDoS attack unless you're one of the very largest companies in the world. So leveraging a CDN with strong security features, with significant network capacity that can exceed what a DDoS attacker can bring to bear is really important. You're leveraging a much larger collection of resources in order to protect your website, your web application. And then on your end, it's important to lock down your origin so that you're only accepting packets originating from your CDN. So don't let people go around your CDN to attack your firewalls, web servers, and web application directly. So you can do that typically with firewall rules at the origin. All right, I'm going to move on from DDoS attacks to sort of a related topic, which is brute force attacks. This is something that we also see very commonly. People will target user accounts typically, whether that's a attempted login or a forgot password flow, or sometimes they'll attack a web admin screen. So obviously, I'm sure some of you are aware of people getting into WordPress sites by hacking the WP admin, et cetera. But many web applications, including e-commerce applications, have either administration or a CMS system or a customer service system or all kinds of admin level accounts and applications that are sometimes exposed over the internet for various legitimate business reasons, and they can fall prey to brute force attacks just as easily as a customer-facing e-commerce site can. Something that's interesting here is that data breaches, that we talked about a little bit earlier, can then feed brute force attacks. So for instance, a data breach from one company might release, and we were seeing obviously in the earlier slides, hundreds of millions of impacted user records. Once you have email addresses and passwords, whether those passwords were encrypted two-way or not encrypted or hashed with a weak hash, you can have the ability to start bulk testing that data on other websites to get access to the accounts there. See if we got jumping the gun on that slide. So you'll see where a data breach from a major website can then be used to try to gain access to all of those same users who may have accounts on Amazon or on Michael Kors or Burberry or a major website like that. And they're logging in with the same email address, and many people leverage the same passwords or a variation of the password. And so you're seeing sophisticated attackers take bulk breach data and use that to launch a brute force attack on other websites that may have value, whether it's credit card information or the ability to place orders, who don't have necessarily the best security features in place to prevent a malicious user gaining access to an account and being able to change shipping addresses or things like that. And those are interesting because instead of a more traditional brute force attack where you're trying millions of passwords or whatever it is, you may have millions of records, but you have the email address and the password based on a reverse, a rainbow table on a hash or something like that you can try. So you're only having to try one combination of credentials per account. So it's not like you're trying to log into a single account with a million passwords and triggering a lot of the more common security features that prevent kind of brute forcing password attacks. It's you try a username or email and password combination for one account. If that works, great. It's marked down by the attacking system. And if it doesn't work, it simply moves on to the next account, which works around a lot of the more traditional prevention systems for a brute force attack. Basically, you end up with a cascade effect. So one data breach from one website will allow attackers or people who purchase that data to gain access to people's accounts on many secondary websites that were unassociated with the initial breach. And that can be especially devastating for e-commerce sites. There's a relatively high profile event where 21 million accounts on the Alibaba e-commerce site, Taibo, have been compromised due to credentials stolen from third-party breaches that had nothing to do with those systems. Attackers were able to get access to all kinds of information and place a bunch of fraudulent orders, put in fraudulent reviews to boost products. It was kind of a mess. And brute force attacks have also been kind of difficult to identify and block against. We had one of our clients who recently had a significant attack which was coming from a vast number of IPs globally. So they were getting attacked from China and Russia, but also from California and New York. And what the attackers were doing was they were trying to brute force accounts on the login page. We believe they were working off of a data set gained from a breach of a third-party website. And the attacks were coming from hundreds of thousands of IPs spread globally, and the user agent string varied across the requests as well. So there was very little you could use to identify from a given request whether it was a legitimate login attempt or whether it was part of this large-scale distributed attack. Again, as I mentioned earlier, login is one of those things that has a relatively high cost on the server side because it involves a database transaction. So we became aware of it initially when we were seeing performance issues impacting the website due to this traffic. The overall rate from a given IP of requests wasn't exceeding what you'd see from a normal user, but it was all hitting the login form over and over and over again. And again, 100,000 IPs spread across the world, different user agents. It makes it very difficult to identify. The traffic looks completely legitimate. So how do you block that stuff? IDS, IPS, so intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, web application firewall. In the end, a lot of it comes down to things like custom scripts or fail to ban and rate limiting high value resources. So it's difficult, because of the reasons we just talked about, to correctly identify and block distributed brute force attacks like we saw at our client. Different IPs, different user agents, all that. But what we can do is we can say, okay, we're not going to rate limit access to the website at large because they were falling into kind of that normal traffic pattern. But what we can say is that it's very weird for someone to be hitting the login page a bunch, right? So submitting that specific form, hitting that specific resource, which is a high value resource, which is with a large cost within the web application. We can set rate limits for those resources, those pages, those forms, those URLs, specifically outside of the general traffic patterns. That's one thing that you can do with a tool like fail to ban or whatever. But in general, same with DDoS attacks. It's much better if you're able to do this at the CDN layer, so you're not trying to manage all of this on your own at the origin and competing for resources. There we go. And just real briefly, in addition to DDoS attacks and brute force attacks, which we're seeing, again, increasing sophistication, increasing scale and scope, and increasingly difficult to detect, all of that comes down to kind of critical security stuff for any website, but especially e-commerce. E-commerce also has some specific needs around performance, and this is stats I'm sure you guys have seen before, right? But based on Amazon data, an increase in page load time has a direct impact on sales. Based on Google, page load time impacts, or I think this might be Yahoo, impacts people clicking the back button, which impacts conversions and web application usage. And increased page load time impacts traffic. So this is true for all websites, but particularly e-commerce. Performance and detrimental performance has a direct impact on the bottom line, conversions, purchases, etc. So that's something to keep in mind while you're wrestling with the security issues and making sure your website's protected, is you don't want to be impacting the usability and the performance of the website for your end customers, or you'll pay that price instead. And at this point, I think it's time for me to hand it off to Christian at Cloudflare.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Devon. These were really great insights. And, you know, from the Cloudflare side with our 6 million customers, I can very much mirror your comments. We see exactly the same patterns here. So bottom line is, it really comes down for e-commerce customers to reduce latency and, of course, address the security challenges which we just described. So at Cloudflare, we are trying to accelerate and secure websites and web applications. And we do this by providing a massive network which is available as a service. So we see with this network, we are managing about 10% of the worldwide HTTP traffic. In this network, we provide two main capabilities. The first one is the content delivery network, and the other one, of course, is related to the DDoS and the security protection. So if you start with the content delivery network, one of the major features is the ability, is a feature called Anycast, which allows us to route the request to the closest server. So we have about worldwide 102 data centers, so points of presence, which allows us to always route the request now to one of those POPs which are close by. So hand in hand with Anycast also goes our caching ability. So of course, if you route a request to a local POP, then of course you also need to have a local copy of the content available. But you know, on top of this, we provide quite a few different capabilities to optimize and increase performance. We provide image and code optimization. We support IPv6, for example, which accelerates mobile load times by more than 10%. We support TLS 1.3. We support HTTP2 with server push and so on. So there are quite a few innovations we constantly push to make our websites, the websites of our customers faster. If you look at security and DDoS, then we have been providing support to protect our customers against layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7 DDoS attacks for quite some time. And so we do this by providing this massive network which has a network capacity of 10 terabits per second. So this is, as Devon mentioned, 10 times larger than the largest attack we have recently seen. And what we do is we simply absorb the traffic within our network, and so that our customers never really see this attack traffic. And it's very unlikely that any attack will really have the ability to bring our network down. So these are kind of core capabilities we have provided at Cloudflare for quite some time. Today, I actually would like to talk about two new capabilities which we are just rolling out to our enterprise customers. And these are capabilities around rate limiting and load balancing. So let's talk about those challenges first we see with our customers. So as Devon mentioned, the frequency and the intensity of DDoS attacks very much increased over the last few years. But what's also happening is that those attacks are moving up the stack. So we see an increasing amount of layer 7 DDoS attacks. And those attacks are very tricky because the attack traffic looks legitimate. So it is very difficult to filter out attack traffic from the usual legitimate traffic. So there are different types. One of those, for example, are volumetric layer 7 denial of services attacks, which then try to flood the system of a customer so that the system becomes unavailable for legitimate users. On the other hand, there are also, as Devon described, brute force attacks on sensitive endpoints. So sensitive endpoints could be, for example, the login page of customers or registration pages. And attackers would go in and essentially use a dictionary to go through all kinds of password and word combinations to guess a viable login password. And then with this, they would get access to the system. Once you're in there, of course, sensitive data might be breached, or you might even be able to bring down the system from within. A third aspect really is the excessive usage of API endpoints. And there are really two aspects here. One is cost-related, the other one is loss of opportunity related. So if you have a service provider, then attacks might increase your bandwidth and your CPU costs. And so then in the end, the upstream provider will charge you for attack traffic, which of course will increase your cost and might also burst your budgets, which is obviously not a good thing. On the other hand, if the upstream provider sets usage limits, then this might block also legitimate traffic, which you then won't be able to monetize anymore. So rate limiting is our answer, Cloudflare's answer to address those challenges. So rate limiting complements our existing layer 3, layer 4, layer 7 DDoS attack protection. And it also rounds out our capability with Cloudflare's web application firewall services. So rate limiting really protects against layer 7 denial of service attacks, brute force, password attempts, and all other types of abusive behavior targeting the application layer. So if you go a little bit more into detail, it provides the ability to configure thresholds and define responses by IP. And so if traffic from a specific IP exceeds the threshold, then those requests can be blocked and they can be timed out for a specified period. Cloudflare, very different to many other companies, doesn't charge for blocked traffic. So we don't charge our customers for attack traffic. We only charge for the good traffic, which is the viable traffic to your sites. So overall, there are quite a few benefits the solution now provides. First of all, it gives you fine-grained control to mitigate layer 7 DDoS attacks. It helps you to protect your customer data. It ensures availability. And of course, also it protects you against the cost which may stem from DDoS attacks. Another solution, another product we are just rolling out is Cloudflare's load balancing. And let's also walk through some of the customer challenges we typically see here. So one of those is related to the health of services. So very often, it's very hard for our customers to actually identify whether a service is still available. And if the service is down for whatever reason, then traffic might still get routed to the specific server. And because the server is not available, the traffic gets dropped. Towards the end users, then this appears as a service disruption, and the site is the specific service is not available. So on the other hand, there are quite a few other aspects related to latency. So servers might be overutilized, and so the performance might be sluggish and performance might be slow. Or in some cases, traffic might be routed to a server which is very distant, so that there would be latency times being incurred just from traffic for these long distances there. So load balancing, Cloudflare load balancing addresses these challenges, and there are two major capabilities. The first one is around health checks with fast failover, and the second one is around global and local load balancing. So let's talk about the health checks and fast failovers. So here we can do periodically monitor a specific URL through HTTP and HTTP requests. And we can monitor the availability of the server as often as every 15 seconds. If the site is down, you can get a reporting via an email notification, or of course through a REST API, which then would allow you to route traffic to available and healthy sites. The really nice thing about this is that Cloudflare's load balancing is based on Cloudflare's DNS service, which is one of the fastest in the world. And so this allows us to fail over traffic very, very rapidly to the healthy sites. So you don't have to wait for public time to live until they expire, which you would have with many, many other services. So if you look at the second scenario, global and local load balancing. So let's start with local load balancing. One of our joint customers, for example, is a trading application. So they experience high volumes of traffic. So this specific service has created many front-end servers to be able to handle this traffic. And with local load balancing, now you have the ability to distribute the traffic across these different front-end servers, which allows you to make sure that each server is respondent and fast, and you have low latency times. Global load balancing is a very, very interesting scenario, and let me also walk you through a customer case study here. So we have a customer, they have a travel website based in the United Kingdom. They have 2 origin servers there, and from there they provided guided travel tours throughout Europe for those European customers. Now this company wants to expand into the United States and offer also services over there. So the company has optimized the website that 90% of the content is actually static. And so this static content can now easily be cached at Cloudflare's content delivery network. And if a customer from a consumer from the United States wants to access this content, then they can do this through a local server based on our Anycast technology, and it will provide very, very fast access. The challenge really comes in with dynamic content. So the remaining 10% of the content is dynamic, and this could be information, let's say pricing information, or availability of tours, or availability of goods if you look at an e-commerce site. So now a US customer might actually access origin server in the United Kingdom, and of course this would really increase latency, and there would be a slow time to first byte. Now with global load balancing, you get much more control, and you can ensure that even for dynamic content, so for all types of content, you have control to direct traffic from a local consumer to a local POP. So the US consumers would get access to a local server with a very fast time to first byte, and then the European consumers would access the European servers and would also get a very, very fast response here. So as I mentioned before, this technology is based on our DNS service and based on our global Anycast network. And again, the same benefits I described before in terms of security, of course, also apply here now. So it's very unlikely that a DDoS attack will bring down our network just because of the sheer size of this network we have. And so this means that also for load balancing, we can always help you to route traffic to a healthy site and ensure the availability of your service. So these are 2 major new capabilities we are just rolling out at Cloudflare, which I believe might be very interesting and relevant also for, especially for e-commerce customers. And so this really concludes my remarks here. So I hope that this was interesting for you. Thank you for sharing time with us. And at this time, I would also like to open the panel for questions. Devon, do you have any questions in the Q&A sessions you would like to go through?
I don't see any questions yet, but if there are any, certainly happy to jump on them.
Okay, great. If you have questions, just please let us know. Yeah, so I'm just getting a question here about the availability of those two capabilities. So these capabilities are available to our customers. You can sign up for these services today through Cloudflare, and we will also roll out these capabilities to our self-service customers over the next few weeks. But those services are available. We actually have quite a few customers on both services already. I checked yesterday, it's I think already 150 customers using the load balancing service, so it finds very, very strong adoption. And from talking to customers, if there's a need for this, it provides a very, very strong value prop. I see another question coming in also here for load balancing. So how can I make sure that the service actually really works and fails over as advertised? Yeah, so that's a really good question. So we actually also provide trial periods and trials for our customers. So customers can go set this up and try this out, typically for 1 week, but if there's need for more, then we can of course also do this longer. And then if there's a need, we can also hook you up with one of our solution engineers to address these things. So a few of our customers I've seen had this issue and went through this, and I think so far it always has worked out great.
Right. Just got a question. Yeah, I'll take this one. It asks, are there 3 attacks, DDoS, brute force, and API attacks, the biggest ones to worry about? I can't answer globally, but I will say that DDoS and brute force attacks have been the biggest issues that we've seen with our clients lately, both growing, like I said, in sophistication and scope. Specifically, the brute force kind of attacks using whether it's breach data or simply the old-fashioned brute force type of attack. We've seen a lot more of those coming from more sophisticated networks. They're no longer coming from 10 IPs, they're coming from 100,000 IPs, and they're no longer all using the same user agent or things that make it very easy to filter out. So we're seeing a lot more sophistication there and seeing a lot more impact to client sites without, unless you take the correct measures to prevent that. So those are, I think, the 3 that our clients are seeing the most of, are the ones that I would worry about most. I'm not sure, Christian, if you have other stuff you'd want to talk about on that topic. Yeah. Actually, this is a good intersection, Devon.
The latest, largest DDoS attack was actually an IoT-based Mirai attack. So this is really interesting. Mirai is some software which allows you to bring wireless devices under control of an attacker. And so this is actually, the software was actually posted on some hacker forums, so it's accessible to everybody. And it allows you to scan the entire IPv4 address space within only a few hours. And if you have a video camera which is just connected, or a baby monitor or anything else, then the Mirai software will be loaded on your device and will be taken over. And as a consumer, you actually won't even notice this. I mean, it might be sometimes that the performance of the device is sluggish, but otherwise you won't even realize this. And so by doing this, the latest attack, the attackers have formed a very large Mirai botnet network. And we believe this is from the latest reports, it's around 300,000 devices, which then allowed the attackers to bring down this large 1 terabit per second attack, which brought actually down a good chunk of the internet in the northwestern United States. And so this is really the new standard now. So as we mentioned before, this really moved up the stack, and this is kind of the new base level for DDoS attacks.
Great.
All right, Adam.
Sorry?
Yeah, go on, Devon.
All right. There's a new question in that says, while measuring e-com site performance, do we measure performance across multiple internet speeds, such as dial-up, cellular, DSL, or do we confine to any specific internet speed? And that's a fantastic question. The way I look at web application performance and e-com performance in particular is there's definitely a couple of slices to it, right? There's application and origin performance, and then there's end user performance and how a actual customer or consumer views the website and what their experience is like on the website. So there's a bunch of very relevant metrics to measure when you're looking at site performance. And the origin and the application performance and resource utilization of the web application on the servers or VMs or whatever you're using is a critical one and plays into scalability and all that stuff. But what you're talking about here, which is end user performance and how the website looks and feels on different devices attached to different types of connections, is really critical. And that's where those stats that I mentioned really briefly at the end of my section of the presentation really come into play. So that 100 milliseconds is 100 milliseconds at the end user side is related directly to the experience of the end user. And so that is super, super important. As far as how you want to measure that and count that for your own website or the websites you're working with, it really depends on the demographics of your customers. And not just all your visitors to the website, but your actual customers that you care about, right? So we have some clients, just talking about personal experience here, who are selling primarily to the US marketplace, and they might be selling high-end goods. And so their important traffic is coming in typically on newer, faster devices attached to very fast connections, or even if it's an iPhone on an LTE network in New York City, right? And that's a very different end user experience than someone who might be a customer of one of our multiple African clients who are serving sub-Saharan Africa, where the infrastructure is very different and the device speed and age is very different. And so it really kind of depends on who you are and who you're selling to. So a high-end US retailer targeting US clients or US customers, they can afford to ignore dial-up, slow cellular, and old devices when they're doing performance testing analysis and building up their front end. So they can afford to do more involved front-end work that might perform worse over a slower latency connection because they don't really care. The one thing I will point out there is that some of those clients will see visitor traffic coming in from other countries, but if they're not selling in those jurisdictions, then that traffic isn't as valuable as the core US traffic is. So they can afford to target the actual conversion customers, people who are making purchases and spending money, and build a very different site than if they were selling globally and doing a lot of business in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. Conversely, our African clients, they need to make sure their websites perform well for their customer base who are using older devices on slower connections. And that's one of the places where CDN becomes even more important because they're serving content out across sub-Saharan Africa, and being able to have those assets loaded more quickly and more locally is incredibly important. So I think the answer to your question is it really depends on who you're selling to, but definitely keep that in mind when you're doing your analytics and planning your end user load tests.
All right, perfect. I see another email, another question just coming in. How does Cloudflare fit with AWS? So actually, we really are very much the security layer sitting on top of AWS. And many, many customers are using us in this capacity. It's a very large number. But, you know, our service is really provided, provisioned through our DNS. So we are working with all kinds of public clouds, whether this is AWS or Google or Azure. All right, so I don't see any new questions. So if you have any more questions for Devon or for me, then please feel very free to reach out. I think you can see our Cloudflare and SparkRed email accounts here. And then, of course, we would be happy to engage with you and see how we can help you. Again, thank you very much for spending time with us. I very much appreciate this and wish you a good day.
Yes, my thanks as well to everybody. Hopefully this was valuable.
Well, thank you, Christian and Devon. We'd like to say a big thank you to you and for presenting this webcast and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Now, we also like to thank you, all of you who attended our webcast today, and hope you have benefited from the presentation. Now, just quickly, if you have the recording is ready, will be ready in about 24 to 48 hours. You will receive a link to the recording with the details, so please feel free to check your email for the recording link. And this will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everyone.